I don't think I really understood the power Disco Elysium held over me until a couple months after I beat the game, when I absent-mindedly threw on the soundtrack while doing some work and heard this. The funny thing is, I had never even thought of this as part of the soundtrack. These tinny horns play throughout the game so frequently that I remember being annoyed by them as I reached the final hours of my first playthrough, and yet I realized, listening to the audio file on my desktop, that I never thought of these horns as part of the soundtrack, because I didn't ever think they could be removed from the city that the game takes place in, Revachol. And ultimately, I don't think they can. Because I heard those horns, and I was there again.
There is nothing. Only warm primordial blackness.
The void comes first in Disco Elysium. It's where the game starts. It's the first bit of dialogue you get. It's the source of one of the best vocal performances in recent memory.
You got it, sweet brother. Nothing upon nothing upon nothing.
It makes sense that you start in the void. Your character, on the tail end of a bender that's lasted either 3 days or several years, depending on how you measure it, screamed, "I don't want to be this kind of animal anymore!" and slipped into an amnesiac unconsciousness. In gameplay terms, this results in you starting the game in a hotel room, with no idea who you are, how you got there, or where the hell your other shoe is. Stumbling around the hotel lobby, you can get some basic info on your surroundings. You're in a large city called Revachol. You're in a district of that city called Martinaise. You're a cop who's apparently been knocking around the town and getting drunk for quite a while now.
You're a police officer, sir?
And yet, the aforementioned amnesia has wiped those memories clear, which is excellent, because it gives your character the same experience as you, the player. You get to experience this city for the first time. The city, like you, is kind of a dumpster fire. When you walk out of the hotel that you trashed, you find yourself in Martinaise, a seaside sector of Revachol. What's in Martinaise? Well, a lot of bullet holes in walls, symptoms of a revolution violently ended, bottles strewn around every corner, so many that it probably wasn't even you who drank all of them. There's a doomed commercial district, referred to as such, holding one struggling bookstore and a locked warehouse full of ghosts. And there's the reason you're here, a dead body that's been hanging in a tree for days. To put it bluntly, it feels like a city that would have a dead body in a tree. You and this place share a brokenness. Your multi-day bender parallels its multi-decade history, full of conflict and failures and broken promises. But unlike our character, who retreated into a void and came out a tabula rasa, Revachol can't even pretend to remove itself from its history. There's a record of everything that's happened to it in its pockmarked streets and crumbling apartments. It's why I didn't even consider that those horns would be part of the game's soundtrack and not just the sound of its world. They just fit in so perfectly. Distorted and fragile, like they're being broadcast through speakers that have been blasted with salty ocean air for longer than anyone can remember. But it's also why, unlike our character, Revachol has a sort of charisma that can't be removed from it. Layers and layers built on top of each other, each that still communicates to you in indefinable ways. Again, in gameplay terms, this manifests through maybe the best skill ever put in a game, a skill called shivers. A quick explanation about the mechanics of Disco Elysium. Like many other role-playing games, this game has a skill tree, which you can invest points in to gain statistical advantages. However, in Disco Elysium, these skills aren't like Fireball, they're attributes of your personhood. For example, you can invest in authority, which allows you to intimidate others more easily, or you can invest in drama, letting you lie and perceive other performances better. Investing in these skills elevates their voices, and I don't mean that in a purely metaphorical way. Throughout conversations with people, each skill will literally interrupt you, authority telling you to press your advantage, or empathy trying to understand where they're coming from. Conversations in Disco Elysium are between you, the person you're speaking to, and the dozens of voices in your head. So you might invest to become the best cop you can be, distributing your experience between rhetoric, authority, physical prowess, skills that directly aid your interrogations of other people. Or, like me, you can dump all your points into something called Shivers, which the game describes with 2 short sentences. Raise the hair on your neck. Tune in to the city. While the other skills may comment specifically on the situation you're in, Shivers wholly steps outside your character and speaks in spatial memories. You might be in the middle of a conversation when someone offhandedly mentions school, and Shivers breaks in with,
"The gale wind blows in from the coast, a wind of needles. It wraps itself around a building of brick and mortar. Somewhere a clamor rings through the honeycomb of classrooms."
You might step into the remains of an apartment block and suddenly be met with the memories of the architect that created it decades earlier.
Her face is red from the cold. She's breathing on her fingers. Traces of sadness are visible in her expression.
Shivers gives you a direct advantage in your situation far less often than most of the other skills, but in return it helped me understand where I was, something that ended up being far more valuable than I could have guessed. There is, if you want it, almost infinite information available about Martinaise, Revachol, the world beyond. One of the skills in particular, Encyclopedia, specializes in this kind of raw data. Invest in Encyclopedia and you'll be bombarded with factoids, names and dates and events stretching back hundreds of years. It is all undeniably interesting, but at the same time, it is completely overwhelming. As much as my skill tree may say otherwise, I am not an encyclopedia. These things slip out of my memory just as quickly as I can read them. The difference between Encyclopedia and Shivers, these 2 ways of knowing the city, is the difference between a historian who studied New York for decades and a taxi driver who's traced the streets for the same amount of time. Both are valuable, legitimate ways of knowing a place, but while the historian's knowledge can be categorized and quantified, the driver's feels more ineffable. They might understand the city less as a series of events and more as a bloodstream.
Ma la città non dice il suo passato, lo contiene come le linee di una mano, scritto negli spigoli delle vie, nelle griglie delle finestre, negli scorrimano delle scale, nelle antenne dei parafulmini, nelle aste delle bandiere, ogni segmento rigato a sua volta di graffi, seghettature, intagli, svirgole.
The other reason I attached myself to this more nebulous way of knowing a place is that the detached, authoritative voice of the encyclopedia feels so alien to the existence of the people actually living here. There is no tome of knowledge that can accurately describe the city as each person resides in it, because, although they occupy the same area, each lives in a city unique to only them. René Arnaud, an ancient veteran, failed enforcer of fascism, current player of pétanque, lives in a Revachol that stands as a monument to his failures. His service was for a violent monarchy that was crushed by a communist revolution that was, in turn, swiftly and brutally stamped out by another army. The bullet holes and shrapnel embedded in the seaside walls just remind René that they accomplished what he could not. It's a city in which he still vainly carries out a facsimile of his military training, spending cold nights in a security booth, keeping watch over nothing and no one. Nia, a woman who works as a dice maker in an abandoned industrial chimney, lives in a Revachol constructed from absurd and hopeful business ventures, of which only she has survived. Situated squarely in what's known as the doomed commercial district, Nia has seen a revolving parade of entrepreneurs march through the building. An ice cream company that tried to sell treats from a terrifying taxidermied bear, a boxing gym that had a punching bag rumored to be full of amphetamines, a tabletop game studio that got more ambitious the less money they had. And yet she remains passionate and content, the unforgiving Revachol outside her windows met with the cool and controlled brick of the chimney she works in. Whereas Renee might look at the doomed commercial district as a blight that an authoritarian takeover could fix, Nia sees it as a sad symptom of an unforgiving capitalist system, one where each enterprising group of people were foiled by greed or overwork, or a giant bear-shaped refrigerator. And to be clear, it's not like they're equally correct. Renee's fascist takeover would have gone about as far as he can throw a petanque ball, but the point remains. Although they occupy the same city, look at the same buildings, they live worlds apart.
Guardatevi dal dir loro che talvolta città diverse si succedono sopra lo stesso suolo e sotto lo stesso nome, nascono e muoiono senza essersi conosciute, incomunicabili tra loro.
The creators of Disco Elysium have been forthright with their influences for the game. For instance, much of the soundtrack, and by extension much of the tone of the game, comes from the band British Sea Power. My Beloved Horns come from their song Red Rock Riviera, which itself was originally the soundtrack for a wordless documentary made with historical footage of Britain's seashore. One work, which they reference by name, is China Miéville's novel The City and the City, a sort of surreal, noir-y detective story that takes place in two cities that occupy the same physical space. Travel between these cities is prohibited, and yet a mysterious murder takes the protagonist through both. It's certainly not hard to see the similarities to the game. However, when I think of the different forms of Revachol as they appear to each resident, the parallel cities of Miéville falter. Instead, I turn to Italo Calvino and his novel Invisible Cities. Find an essay that says city more than this one, I dare you. The framing of Calvino's book is both high concept and, for our purposes, not hugely consequential. Marco Polo is telling the Emperor Kublai Khan about dozens of different cities never seen by the Emperor and never seen by any of us. Most pages of the book are a piece of prose about one of these places.
Inutilmente, magnanimo Kublai, tenterò di descriverti la città di Zaira dagli alti bastioni. Potrei dirti di quanti gradini sono le vie fatte a scale, di che sesto gli archi dei porticati, di quali lamine di zinco sono ricoperti i tetti, ma so già che sarebbe come non dirti nulla. Non di questo è fatta la città, ma di relazioni tra le misure del suo spazio e gli avvenimenti del suo passato.
Polo describes 55 different cities to Khan throughout the book, though gradually we start to wonder how familiar even he is with the places he describes. Has he lived there? Visited? Have they ever existed? His own words wrestle with this as well, like the city of Morilia, whose residents will show postcards of what it used to be, begging you to join in their nostalgia for a place that even they debatably remember. Invisible Cities is firmly unstuck in time. The 13th century Marco Polo describes antennas and suburbs and phone booths. However, it's also intensely reflective. In one conversation, Kublai asks him why he's never mentioned the city of his birth, Venice. He responds,
Ogni volta che descrivo una città,
every time I describe a city, I am saying something about Venice. Memory's images, once they are fixed in words, are erased. Perhaps I am afraid of losing Venice all at once. I speak of it. Or perhaps, speaking of other cities, I have already lost it. In Disco Elysium, your character has more or less obliterated his memories of home, with liters of alcohol and years of self-hate. And yet still, that place influences your character. you find a phone in an office and your fingers find themselves tracing the number to the video rental store blocks from your childhood house. Maybe it's because he so effectively erased his conscious memories of that place that he finds himself unable to stop its influence. Polo fears losing Venice by affixing it to a set of words. Our protagonist has tried everything to lose the sense of where he's from, and yet it persists. When you open Disco Elysium, before you even hit New Game, you're met with this screen, a view of almost the totality of everywhere you go in the city, and miles beyond. Bookended by a church built by some of the first settlers of Martinaise on one side, the crumbling apartments on the other, the sprawl of Revachol extending for miles behind. Clouds swirl past, and above them the Pale, the whirling entropy that surrounds every livable landmass in this world. The perspective it gives us on the game's locale is beautiful, but it's also directly relevant to the events of the game. In fact, one can basically pinpoint where this perspective of the city comes from. A small military island, a boat ride away from the coast. It's an island you only go to at the very end of the game, and its only resident is an ancient, bitter sniper. One who put a bullet through the neck of the man you found hanging behind the hotel. There is honestly too much history to get into with Josef Lilianov Dros, failed revolutionary, trained never to surrender, ultimately possessor of a psychosexual fixation on a woman he could see through the window of the hotel. He is a mess. But ever since I realized that this view, the main menu's view, is what Dros would see every day, it's all I can think about. Revachol, full of the hopes and hates and desires of countless people, each living in a city of their very own, and watching it all, this sniper, perhaps better able to take in the beauty of the city than anyone, but totally detached and filling with bile. What was Revachol to him? How did seeing this every day, never letting himself in, twist him into the broken shell we discover? The Pale, as I mentioned earlier, is a sort of unlivable entropy that surrounds everything in this world. It's like if our oceans were the vacuum of space, near impossible to cross with no indication there's life on the other side. It surrounds Revachol, as we can see above the billowing clouds from the sniper's perch. But a quiet horror hidden in the corners of Disco Elysium's lore is the fact that the Pale is growing. It's expanding at an unknown rate, and in fact you can find a bit of the Pale, a hole in the world, in the rafters of this church in Martinaise. One day soon on a generational timescale, all of this will be gone. In Invisible Cities, my personal favorite city is the ignobly named Phyllis. Polo says that when you arrive at Phyllis, you rejoice. At every point, the city offers surprises to your view. Happy is the man who has Phyllis before his eyes each day, and who never ceases seeing the things it contains.
Ti accade invece di fermarti a Fillide e passarvi il resto dei tuoi giorni. Presto la città sbiadisce ai tuoi occhi. Segui linee a zigzag da una via all'altra. Tutto il resto della città è invisibile. Milioni d'occhi s'alzano su finestre, ponti, capperi, ed è come se scorressero su una pagina bianca.
Many are the cities like Phyllis, which elude the gaze of all, except the man who catches them by surprise. For almost all of my life, I've lived in the same place. For a few months apiece, I've made other cities my home. Ever since I've left them, I've thought about them constantly. When I was there, I thought about where I'm from. I don't know how to handle this. I don't think I'm really supposed to. This is part of being alive. Attaching pieces of ourselves to the places we inhabit. unable to extract our emotional memory from the streets and archways and roofs. The void comes first in Disco Elysium, and the void will probably come last. But in between, Revachol can catch us by surprise. 1,000 different cities for 1,000 different people. For me, it's the first night, standing on the balcony of the hotel with Kim as he smokes a cigarette and watches the lights of the city reflect in the harbor. It's a quiet conversation with a working-class woman in her apartment. It's in the faded majesty of those horns, a majesty that, when I hear them again months later, sends a cold wind across my neck and a shiver down my spine.
Hey, did you know there's a video of mine you probably haven't seen? I know, you thought you were so careful. The reason that you haven't seen it is because I made it for an original ongoing series at Nebula called Working Titles. Now, you've heard me talk about Nebula before. It's a streaming service that's actually tuned to the needs of creators. But one of the other reasons I like it is they have these original series that let people like me kind of go outside their usual arena, which is why I was able to make a whole video on the theme song to the TV show Community and put it up there.
Canceled it, and it was only picked up for one final season on Yahoo Screen, a streaming service that seemingly only existed so Community could spend all of its money and then end.
Now you might be saying, Jacob, you said this video was sponsored by CuriosityStream, and yet you've been talking about Nebula. To which I would respond, first off, welcome to the channel. And secondly, they're a package deal. You can get both CuriosityStream and Nebula together for less than $15 for a whole year by following the link down there in the description. CuriosityStream, for what it's worth, is a pretty good deal. It's thousands of documentaries and other nonfiction titles. They actually have a whole series on the invisible cities of Italy. Look, you can hear real historians talking about real history. You can hear me getting emotional about a TV show. Both of these things are available to you for less than $15 just by following the link down there. It is the easiest decision you will make all year.
I would often go there, to the tiny church there, the smallest church in Saint-Saëns. Though it once was larger, how the realm may rest there, down through the mist there, toward the Seven Sisters, toward those pale cliffs there. I would often stay there, in their tiny yard,